It is believed that in this place, somewhere between the old borders of the Carpetani tribes and the Celt-Iberians, themselves, as you can imagine, a mixture of Celts and Iberians, there was once a hill fort that went by the name of Segóbriga, which in the old language was a mixture of the two words Sego, meaning victory, and Briga, meaning city or fortress. Now, this town here, protected on the south by a river, Tiguela, has existed here, it would seem, for about 3,000 years, even before the Celt-Iberians were here. Of course, as is the case at many other places in Europe, the oldest written records we have of this town are of Roman origin, and as a result, they are more a reflection of how the Romans conquered and moulded and shaped their lands, rather than a picture of who lived there before, the Celt-Iberians and all the other pre-Roman tribes. Pliny the Elder, for instance, a famous author, naturalist, and even army commander, only really mentions the town in passing when talking about the local mines of lapis secularis, which is a form of transparent gypsum used in the manufacturing of windows, which was also one of the main sources of wealth for this town. But perhaps not being in the Roman history books is not such a terrible thing, if you think about it. After all, this city may have never really been a local capital or a city of particular importance, but it was as successful and prosperous as any city at the time could have hoped to be. In fact, during the time of Augustus, it was actually awarded the status of municipium, which is the second highest level that a non-Roman city could ever hope to achieve. And with that status came the label of Roman citizens for anyone that lived in the city, slaves aside. This also elevated the city to new heights that culminated with the construction of multiple traditionally Roman public works, among which are some of Segóbriga's most recognizable features, including the Colosseum and the theatre, and other less noticeable monuments nowadays, such as the public baths, the forum, the arena, and a wall that was built to protect the citizens of the town. Sitting smack dab in the middle of the road that started in Cartagonova in the Mediterranean coast all the way to Complutum, near what is nowadays Madrid, now lie this city, one of the many way stops that connected the Roman capital with the rest of its empire, one of many roads, in fact. Until it wasn't. Mind you, the cities and the roads remained more or less perfectly in place even after the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire. And, there was a small increase in revolts and wars that marked the period, but all things considered, life and trade remained more or less exactly as it had for centuries prior. The only thing that changed, though, was there were new people in charge. Keep in mind, this change was anything but sudden. The Visigoths, while only marginally at times, did owe some amount of allegiance to the Romans. After all, it had been the Romans that had invited the Visigoths into the peninsula to begin with. Still, despite all the politicking and dealings between the Roman Empire and the Visigoths, it rather soon became quite clear that the Visigoths were going to last longer than the Empire, and more importantly, that they were here to stay. The transition of power could have been a disaster, but with the tendency of the Visigoths to adopt and adapt not just the Roman infrastructure, but also their culture and their values and their legal codes, the transition ended up being quite seamless, at least as far as the citizens of Hispania were concerned. The same could not maybe be said about the rest of Europe. As for the religious aspect, well, the religious conversion shortly thereafter of the Visigoths to the Roman variety of Christianism was really only the cherry on top. Now, after the Visigoths came the Umayyads, and the whole situation could have possibly repeated itself were it not for the different religious beliefs of the Umayyads. So, when the bishops and the elites fled the city, the remaining population, without any real source of wealth, just slowly dissipated into the countryside. On top of that, with the disruption of trade during the initial conquests, there really wasn't much of a point in further urbanization of the settlement. And while the recent invaders were not here to murder everyone, they also weren't really here to maintain the Roman Christian way of life. So when they arrived and found a place that was mostly abandoned, they built a small watchtower on the top of the hill and they mostly left it alone. And so it remained, until the Christian kingdoms rebounded back south during the late Middle Ages. Of course, by this point, the city was but a shadow of its former self. Segóbriga might have been great once, but with the aqueducts long gone, it made little sense to repopulate the ruins. Rather, the only remaining sane option appeared to be to move to where the aqueduct started in the first place, its source. So, rather than invest time, money and resources in restoring a city that no longer even had any of its original inhabitants, the largely rural population of the region reconsolidated around the current-day town of Segóbriga, about 3.5 kilometers north of the old Roman town. The only evidence we have of any people living in the Roman city after Visigothic times is of a small chapel built right atop where the baths used to be. Nowadays, it might seem fun to imagine what might have happened had the place not been abandoned. And in fact, at first glance, for anyone who doesn't know, it might even seem silly to live in a place continuously for millennia, only to abandon and never return. But while the concept of heritage and living in one place, building generations upon generations is a lovely concept, and certainly one worth preserving, it doesn't quite trump the safety and comfort of a home that isn't falling apart, a home that you know who made it, that you know works, that is built to the necessities of the people who live in its place.